Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In the wet streets of Chicago, a chilly wind seeped between the buildings like a silent thief. The street lamps, misted by the winter fog, cast a pale yellow light that flickered on the sidewalks. The city hummed barely. A few distant horns, hurried footsteps, and the clatter of the elevated subway above the deserted avenues. It was one of those evenings when solitude seemed to envelop every concrete corner. Emily Dawson, 23, clutched the straps of her backpack tightly to her shoulders. Her threadbare coat, too thin for the season, was no longer enough to protect her from the biting cold. Her cheeks were reddened by the wind, and her fingers, despite the holes in her gloves, were beginning to freeze. A journalism student at the University of Chicago, she lived in constant tension between course deadlines, sleepless nights, and constant worries about money. An only child, she cared for her mother alone, Margaret, bedridden with multiple sclerosis. Two odd jobs helped her pay for medication, electricity, and sometimes even rent, but rarely for food. That evening, she was leaving the library after a long work session. She hadn't eaten dinner since the day before, and her insides were aching for food. Passing a small food truck with flickering neon lights, she stopped. Her wallet contained only a few coins. She placed them one by one on the counter, her throat tight, knowing that was all she had for the next 2 days. The vendor wordlessly handed her a tuna sandwich wrapped in greasy paper. Emily took it with a strange gratitude mixed with shame. She felt empty, physically and mentally. But at least she would have something to eat tonight. She had only taken a few steps down the adjacent street, the sandwich clutched to her chest, when her eyes fell on a curled-up figure pressed against the wall of a closed building. Under a torn, oversized coat, an elderly man appeared to be sleeping or hunched over. His breathing was visible in the cold, irregular. Beside him, a small plastic bag and a blanket dampened by melted snow. It wasn't the first time Emily had seen a homeless person. In Chicago, they were everywhere. But tonight, there was something different. Perhaps the way the man had hidden his face under his hood, or the absolute loneliness that emanated from him, like a silent distress that no one was listening to anymore. Emily slowed down, then stopped. She hesitated for a moment. Her stomach was screaming. She thought of her mother, of their empty fridge. But a powerful, almost uncontrollable impulse pushed her closer. She slowly knelt before him, despite the cold biting at her knees. "Sir," she said softly. The man didn't answer, but his eyelids fluttered. She held out the sandwich. "The sandwich is yours," she whispered. The man slowly opened his eyes. They were a very clear blue, surprisingly bright despite his fatigue. He stared at her incredulously, as if she were a mirage. His lips trembled. "Are you sure?" His voice was hoarse, raspy, as if he hadn't spoken in a long time. Emily nodded, with a genuine smile. "Absolutely." He took the sandwich with dirty, trembling hands, almost ceremoniously, as if holding a fragile treasure. A silent tear rolled down his cheek, lost itself in his white beard. "Thank you," he breathed. "God bless you." Emily felt a shiver run through her, not from the cold, but from this strange, intimate, human encounter. She stood up slowly, gave him one last look, then left without looking back. She walked for a long time, her heart a little lighter despite her empty stomach. She didn't really think about it anymore. For her, it was just an act of compassion, an instinctive response to a pain she had recognized without naming it. A simple sandwich offered to a stranger. But what Emily didn't know yet was that this small act would turn her life upside down in ways she never imagined. Because at the very moment she disappeared around the corner, the man in the torn coat had just found a reason to get up again. 3 days later, and foggy Saturday morning, Emily was still wrapped up in her threadbare blanket, the shutters closed against a gray Chicago sky. In her small apartment in the South Side, the air was cold. The heating, which had been faulty for 2 weeks, hadn't yet been repaired, and the electric kettle spluttered painfully on a rickety table. She had planned to spend the morning studying for her exams, despite the headache that was already starting to creep up on her. Then, suddenly, there was a knock at the door. 3 clear, precise shots, almost out of place in this calm. Emily Sursata. She wasn't expecting anyone. No friends, no neighbors, no delivery. She approached cautiously and peered through the peephole. What she saw froze her. In front of the door stood an elegant man in a charcoal three-piece suit, a discreet tie, a wool coat over his shoulders, his graying hair perfectly styled. A few steps behind him, parked at the corner of the sidewalk, asheny black sedan was waiting, engine still running. A young driver stood straight next to the vehicle, gloved and impassive. Emily hesitated for a moment, tugged at her oversized sweatshirt a little, and slowly opened it. "Mademoiselle Emily Dawson?" asked the man with a polite but reserved smile. She frowned slightly. "Yes, it's me." He held out a business card engraved on ivory cardboard. On it, in gold letters, "Mr. Douglas Grant, Assistant Personnel to Mr. Alexander Reed." "I am Mr. Grant, and I work for Monsieur Alexander Reed. He asked me to come and get you. He would like to meet you." Emily took a step back, puzzled. The name meant absolutely nothing to her. I don't know a Mr. Reed." "Are you sure it's me?" Mr. Grant remained calm, almost benevolent. "3 days ago, you gave him a sandwich. 12th Avenue Street." Emily's heart leaped. The image of the old man huddled under his worn coat came back to her instantly. His pale gaze, his trembling hands, his muffled thank you. She stammered, a little confused. The homeless man?" Grant nodded, as if he didn't like the wording but wouldn't correct it. "This homeless man, as you say, is in reality Alexander Reed, and he wants to thank you very much for what you have done." Emily suddenly felt out of time. The world she knew, its cracked walls, its debts, its sleepless nights, seemed unreal compared to this perfectly dressed man and this luxury car parked in front of his dilapidated building. "But why? I didn't do anything. It was a sandwich." Mr. Grant smiled for the first time, a genuine and slightly sad smile. "What you gave him wasn't a sandwich. It was a gesture of humanity, a reminder that he still existed, that someone saw him. You can't imagine what that meant to him." Emily felt her throat tighten. She looked behind her, towards her small, cold kitchen, towards the book open on the table, towards her mother's medicine, which she would soon have to refill. Then she looked back at Grant, the driver, the car, the invitation. I have to get dressed." "Of course. We're waiting for you." She closed the door quietly, trembling. Her heart was pounding. She changed quickly, putting on her clean coat, brushing her hair into a clumsy bun, and applying some lip balm to her chapped lips. Then, unsure whether she was heading for a blessing or a mistake, she descended the creaky stairs of her apartment building. The driver opened the door for him. Mr. Grant sat down next to her in the back. The car started, and Emily, swept away into an unknown world, had no idea that that morning would be a most unexpected turn of his life. The car stopped gently in front of a tower of glass and steel, lost amidst the skyscrapers of downtown Chicago. Emily stared out the window, her eyes wide. The lobby, beyond the immaculate glass, looked more like a palace than a residential building. The marble floor gleamed, the walls were adorned with modern artwork, and a gloved doorman opened the door with a discreet bow. Emily stepped out of the sedan with some trepidation. She felt as if she'd been teleported to a parallel world. The elevator, silent and without visible buttons, closed behind her. Mr. Grant inserted a card into an invisible slot, and the doors reopened on the upper floor. A spacious penthouse, open, bright, bathed in a soft, golden winter light. High ceilings, clean-lined furniture, artwork scattered throughout, and at the far end, a huge bay window offering a plunging view of the calm, silvery Lake Michigan. Emily stepped forward hesitantly. Her heart was pounding so hard, she was almost dizzy. And there, in a caramel leather armchair facing the bay window, a man stood up slowly. He was impeccably dressed, midnight blue suit, white shirt without tie, impeccable shoes. His face was clean-shaven, his hair neatly styled, but what struck Emily was his gaze. She recognized those eyes immediately, the same pale, melancholic blue as those of the old man under the torn coat. But today it was a other man. "Hello, Emily," he said in a calm, deep voice, tinged with emotion. "I am Alexander Reed, former CEO of Reed Technologies." Emily stood there frozen. Her eyes widened, her lips parted, but no sound came out. "It's not possible. You were—" He cut her off gently. "A broken man." "Yes." He took a few steps towards her, his hands clasped. "A year ago, my only daughter, Rachel, died in a car accident. She was 19 years old. A drunk driver. From that day on, my life stopped. My whole world collapsed. I left my businesses, my possessions, my relationships. I wanted nothing more. Just to disappear. He looked away briefly, his jaw clenched, struggling to contain the emotion. And I did. I went down into the street, nameless, aimless. I wandered for months, invisible among the invisible. He turned to her again. Until this day, the one where you stopped, where you saw me, not as a bum, not as a human wreck, but as a man. You gave me your only meal, without expecting a thank you, without asking questions. You gave me something far more precious than a sandwich. You gave me dignity. Emily felt her eyes mist over. He came closer, now a few steps away from her. That day, I understood that if a young woman, with nothing, could show so much kindness, then I, with everything I had, I could not die in silence. He took a deep breath. I want to help you. Financially first. You'll never have to choose between eating or buying books again. I want to pay off your debts, your medical bills, and give you an apartment worthy of you. But that's not all. He paused, then said calmly, I have a project, a foundation, and I want it to bear your name. The Emily Foundation. It will help young people like you, courageous, forgotten, brilliant, but without a network, without means. It will give a voice to the silent ones. And I would like that you were directing it, not as an employee, as the founder you have become. Emily took a step back, stunned. She felt her throat tighten, her heart pounding. Me? But I'm nobody. I have no experience. I'm still studying. He raised his hand gently. You are exactly the right person. Not because you have a degree, but because you have something that money can't buy. Humanity. Tears rolled down Emily's cheeks without warning. But why me? Why all this? Alexander stepped forward again, his eyes shining. Because where the world ignored me. You saw me, you offered me a sandwich, and I want to offer you a future. A deep silence filled the room, broken only by the distant murmur of the city below. Then, in a breath, Emily replied, I think this is the first time I've been asked to dream. Alexander smiled softly. So dream big, Emily. Because starting today, anything becomes possible. In the space of a few months, the life of Emily Dawson underwent a metamorphosis that only tales dare to imagine. Under the benevolent wing of Alexander Reed, she finished her master's degree in journalism with the jury's congratulations. But she was no longer just a brilliant student. Emily, thanks to her sincere voice and her moving story, began to intervene in high schools, community centers, universities. She recounted her journey without embellishment, with the humility of those who have never forgotten where they come from. In every speech she spoke not of a miracle, but of a choice, that of having held out a sandwich instead of looking away. And little by little, the looks around her changed. At the same time, the Foundation Emily, born in a bright office in Reed's penthouse, became one of Chicago's most respected social projects. In just 2 years, it financed more than 800 scholarships, organized hundreds of writing, guidance and mentoring workshops, and opened 3 shelters for homeless youth. The media were interested, of course, but Emily refused the empty spotlight. She didn't pose for magazines. She was going on the ground, always. She listened. She shared. She connected. It was her gift. She made others feel visible, just as she had done, one winter evening, for a forgotten old man. And Alexander Reed, he too, was reborn. The broken man had rebuilt himself, not in the shadow of the past, but in the light of a useful future. He had found a reason to get up, to create, to transmit. He laughed again. He spoke of his daughter Rachel with tenderness and no longer with pain. Emily had not replaced Rachel. Nothing could. But she had become a light that he protected like a father, a guide he sometimes followed like a student. They were different, one born into abundance, the other into struggle, but united forever by a gesture of selfless humanity, stronger than money, deeper than words. 5 years later, the Great One Emily Foundation annual gala was in full swing in a sumptuous auditorium, decorated with garlands of golden light and frescoes evoking youth and hope. Chicago's greatest figures were present: business leaders, association leaders, journalists, artists, former scholarship recipients turned professors or entrepreneurs. Emily went on stage in a sober midnight blue dress, her hair tied back simply, true to herself. She paused for a moment at the lectern, looking around the room, then took a deep breath. I'll be honest with you, as always. A small smile crossed the room. I'm not a heroine. 5 years ago, I was hungry, discouraged, tired. I had only one sandwich and a long walk ahead of me, and I passed a man sitting in the cold. A man who, to many, was nothing. She paused for a moment, her eyes shining. I didn't know that by handing him that sandwich, I was sowing something. What I didn't know was that by giving the only thing I had, I was harvesting a future, a life, a mission. Murmurs of emotion ran through the audience. Goodness, you see, it's a seed. You never know in what a heart she will bloom. But one thing is certain. If no one sows it, nothing will ever change. She looked around the room, deeply. So always. Even when in doubt. Even when you think it's nothing. Because sometimes, a simple sandwich can redefine destinies. A thunderous applause erupted in the room. In the front row, Alexander Reed, now aged but with bright eyes, stood up. His eyes, misty with tears, met Emily's. He said nothing. He didn't need to speak. He was proud. Proud of her. Proud to have lived long enough to see this hungry girl change the world. And all around them, in this large auditorium that had become a garden of hope, one could almost hear the discreet beating of a seed that had become a tree.